So now it is my distinct honor to invite Governor Brown out to talk with me about how we move forward on the budget and other issues. Governor Brown has been a leader in Oregon public life for nearly 3 decades. She was first elected to the Oregon House in 1991. In 1996, she became a state senator and later became the first woman to serve as Senate Majority Leader. In 2008, Oregonians elected her Secretary of State, and she has served as governor since 2015. Governor Brown's passion for and commitment to Oregon is unshakable. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Governor Kate Brown.
Thank you. Thank you.
Governor, thank you so much for being with us here today. So we heard some numbers earlier today about job counts up, the economy's doing well, incomes are up, poverty's down. Really overall good news about Oregon's economy. What is working, and what are your key economic development priorities to keep that going?
Thank you, Patrick, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I think out of the 15 summits, I've missed one, so I'm glad I could join you this morning. Well, there's a lot going right in Oregon. Oregon is a tremendous place to live, work, and play, and raise a family. And certainly the economy is doing really well right now. We have the fastest job growth rate in the country. Our GDP is rising quite rapidly. In terms of taxes, Ernst & Young says we have the 5th lowest effective business rate in the country. Certainly that is not spread throughout the state, and I'm very cognizant of that. I'm very pleased that many folks want to come to Oregon because it is such an incredible place to be. We have the fastest, most #1 destination in terms of states in the country. People are moving here because they want to live here. It's a great place to do business. Electricity is relatively reliable and inexpensive, as well as natural gas. And of course, we've got abundant water, and it's good, and it's relatively inexpensive. What gives me hope is that we have been able to come together when Washington, D.C. is really struggling right now. In Oregon, Republicans and Democrats, business community and community officials from around the state have come together around what was the largest transportation package, the most comprehensive transportation package that Oregon has ever passed, a $5.3 billion package that invests in our roads and bridges, and of course, enables us to, yes, thank you. The other piece of that I know is very important for the business plan as well is that for the first time ever, we invested in statewide public transit. And we all know that public transit is literally a vehicle to lift our families out of poverty. So that is significant. In addition, during this last session, we were also able to come together around a funding for the Oregon Health Plan in a way that enables struggling families in this state to access health care. And we now have close to 98% of our children covered. And with the work of the Oregon legislature, we now are going to have 100% of our children covered. And that's significant, yes. But what also gives me hope about Oregon is that we are a state of innovators, entrepreneurs, creators, and mavericks. From Bill Bowerman creating a running shoe out of his wife's waffle iron, to Greg Higgins bringing the farm-to-table movement, to Stephanie Gostin at Blender, creating an app that will make it very difficult to discriminate based on race in employment applications. This is the kind of innovative entrepreneurship economy that we need to continue to invest in, and that gives me hope for Oregon's future.
Excellent. You mentioned that while we're seeing a lot of economic growth in the state, that may not necessarily be positively impacting or shared in every part of the state. And I know we talk a lot about the difference between what's happening in our rural areas from the urban areas. what can be done in rural areas, particularly those that relied heavily on natural resources historically, to continue the needed economic growth there?
Well, I'm certainly very cognizant of that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't know if you know this, Patrick, but Dan and I started dating when he was working for the Whitman in Enterprise, Oregon. And I know most people end up living together and then get married. We did the opposite. We commuted for a year, and then we got married at the Wallowa Lake Roller Skating Lodge, which is quite dilapidated right now, trust me. And then after a year commuting back and forth, we ended up moving to Portland. But for me, it taught me a lot about rural values and gave me a sense of rural Oregon's perspective. But I also still have that urban-rural divide in my household right now. My stepdaughter lives in inner southeast Portland, and my stepson lives in Prineville, and he works in Crescent, and he's paying $12 a night to enjoy what I'm sure is the very luxurious comfort of a bunkhouse in Crescent, Oregon. So I want to make sure that we have communities that thrive throughout the entire state of Oregon, not just in our urban communities. So I think there's a handful of things that we can do, and we're already working on a number of them. One, investing in infrastructure for rural Oregon. That looks like investments in wonderful projects like the transloader facility in Ontario. It also looks like investing in water infrastructure. Since I became governor, we've invested over $80 million in infrastructure projects for our communities across the state. The third piece is housing, workforce housing and affordable housing. But we did a great project in Pendleton with a private developer to build workforce housing so that folks that were working in Pendleton could actually live in Pendleton, and we hope shop in Pendleton. So over 70 houses were built as a result of that collaboration. And the fourth piece for me in terms of infrastructure is broadband. And we need to make sure that all of our communities have access. We're partnering with our research universities, and I think we just reached an agreement about 2 weeks ago to work towards a system where everyone would have access throughout the state. The second piece is our continuing work around innovation. And two great examples of this, and one of them I saw here a couple of years ago. Actually, I've seen both of them at the summit, so that portends well for the future. One, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. And we have 3 testing sites in Oregon, Pendleton, Warm Springs, and Tillamook, as you know. And this is an incredible opportunity to grow a new industry in rural Oregon. The second one is cross-laminated timber, advanced wood manufacturing. And under my leadership, we invested in a little company in Douglas County. I don't know if Valerie Johnson's here today, DR Johnson, but it is literally the first advanced wood manufacturing facility in the entire United States in Douglas County, and that's a really huge success story. But the product is we get to build beautiful buildings that are sustainable, but also are resilient in the event of an earthquake, and put people back to work in our timber-dependent rural communities. 2 other pieces, which I'm happy to go into more detail as we move along. Workforce training, absolutely critical. I'm so pleased with the business community's support of our career and technical education programs throughout the state. We've been able to quadruple funding. We need to make sure that the work on the ground, what's happening in our high schools and our community colleges, is coordinated with what the workforce needs, particularly in rural Oregon, but also in metropolitan Oregon as well. 2 other things, regulatory reform. My regional solutions team is here, and I can't see any of them right now, but their job is literally to run with scissors, to cut red tape, so that businesses, particularly in rural Oregon, can grow and expand, that we cut the regulatory red tape that prohibits them from doing that. And then lastly, small businesses. And as you know from reading the Business Oregon strategic plan, they're going to be focused on small and medium-sized businesses throughout the state and making sure that they have the tools, the capital they need to grow and thrive and create good-paying jobs in rural Oregon and metropolitan Oregon as well.
Well, thank you for your focus on the rural economic development. All of those issues you mentioned are very important in Tillamook, so thank you for that. I've been the chair of the business plan for 2 years now, and we've had strong economic growth, as we talked about, and the economy has generally done well, which has mostly been the focus of the business plan. And yet we've made the decision last year and then much this morning to use words like structural budget deficit, crisis. We're seeing a growing economy, and yet you get the business community talking about the state budget a lot. Are we in a crisis? From your perspective, how do you see the Oregon's fiscal situation as you look into the future?
So we certainly have what I would call a structural budget deficit, not just for the next biennium, but for the next handful of bienniums. I think my role as governor is 3 or 4-fold. Number one, to continue to provide the supports needed to grow Oregon's economy and create good-paying jobs in every single corner of the state. The second piece is what I call cost containment. And my mother, she's not here, I hope not listening, she worked really hard to make sure that at home we squeezed every single drop of toothpaste out of that toothpaste tube. I was one of 4 kids. And so my job as governor is to make sure that we are doing a better job delivering services more effectively and more efficiently to Oregonians. That means cost containment, obviously reducing the cost growth in state government. It means partnering with the business community around public-private partnerships, and I've had a track record of doing that in my role as Secretary of State and now in my role as governor. And the third piece, and I think this is really key, is making sure we're collaborating with our local partners at levels we've never collaborated before. And probably one of the best examples I can give of this is what happened in Oregon in August when we had the solar eclipse. And some parts of Oregon were in the path of totality, but certainly a number of state agencies worked very closely with law enforcement and elected officials on the ground to make sure that every Oregonian and every Californian and whoever else came, I'm mostly getting notes from Californians, had a really terrific experience. Moving forward, I know that Multnomah County and the City of Portland are working very hard on a partnership that will produce a no-turnaway shelter for the metropolitan area. Frankly, it will serve Oregonians from around the state. I'm hoping the state will step up to the plate and assist in making that happen so that no family in Oregon will have to live on the streets during this horrific winter, that all of our families with children will have a warm, safe, dry place to be at home.
Well, your priorities around the economy and cost containment and partnerships certainly align very well with the business plan, so thank you for that. We laid out a framework last year focused on the budget that talked about the economy, cost containment, and our tax structure. And it seems that battle lines tend to get drawn around over this last year around, on the one side, cost containment, particularly focused on employee benefit costs and employee contributions to PERS, and on the other side around the tax system and how much tax business is paying into the state system to support education and other services. So if we look on the cost side first, just to kind of address both of those. So on the employee benefits piece and the PERS contribution specifically to the UAL, to the liability, does that need to be part of the discussion? How critical is that piece, and where does that fit in terms of prioritization in the structural, what you call the structural budget deficit?
So I see the PERS, that we need to tackle the PERS issue from sort of a 3-legged stool. Number one, making sure we're getting the best return on our investments. And we moved forward on a proposal this last session that will increase the number of staffers at the state treasury. This is important because the 20-year average for our in-house investors is better than the private sectors. So I think that's one key piece. The second piece, tackling the unfunded actuarial liability, which is at $21 billion roughly. We put together a task force, and I want to thank the folks that sat on the task force, led by Don Blair, and I know Monica Nand and Lawrence Fergdahl. It was there was a lot of brain power in that room, and I want to thank them for their time and energy. They came up with a very long list of what I would call innovative and creative solutions to tackle the unfunded actuarial liability. And we are looking at some of the specific proposals for the February 18 session. I'm hoping we can move forward on them. I think the role of the state is to make sure that we are incenting local employers, of which there are several hundred, close to 900, maybe even more than 900 jurisdictions, to focus on paying down their UAL so that the entire number comes down. That will eventually reduce employer rates, enable us to put more monies into classrooms and our COPS and to vulnerable services that vulnerable Oregonians need. The third piece is making sure that employees have some skin in the game, and that means looking at cost sharing, risk sharing. There was a proposal submitted in May of 2017, and so I think that provides the framework of the conversations moving forward. Okay. So that's how I would look at PERS.
Thank you. So, and then the other part I mentioned of the sort of standoff here has to do with revenue on the revenue side and business taxes. Does increasing business taxes need to be part of the solution here?
Well, I think for the long haul, we want to have what I would consider a stable revenue system that provides adequate resources for key services for Oregonians. I don't know if this is a blessing or a curse, but certainly what is happening at the federal level makes it really hard for us to have a detailed conversation about tax policy right now. I just met this morning with folks from the Department of Revenue, my director, Nia Ray, her team, and our economists to talk about what does the federal tax plan look like. 120 provisions in the Senate bill. I think it was a 479-page bill with a lot of handwritten notes. I think it looked like one of my college papers. These were before computers, of course. And senators, I think, voted on the bill without an opportunity to read it. So the bottom line is, we don't know what that looks like. I've tasked my team to work as quickly as possible to analyze the impacts on Oregonians in terms of their federal tax liability, what it looks like in terms of their Oregon tax liability, both for individuals and for the business community, for businesses. And then thirdly, what it will look like in terms of Oregon as a whole. So that's what needs to happen, the first thing. I'm anticipating if things move quickly, we'll have that answer relatively soon. The second piece is bringing my team together to talk about a handful of options to solve the structural deficit issues Oregon faces, not just for the short term, but for the long term. It is time that we quit kicking this can down the road. And I feel a level of anxiety about it, and my chief of staff, Nick Blosser, will tell you I call him just about every day on this, because I have to prepare a budget. And that budget gets submitted mid-November, about 10 days after the election, and that budget has to be balanced. And from my perspective, it has to be realistic. It has to reflect and keep incent Oregon's economy growing, and it has to make sure that we don't hurt struggling families. So I've asked my team to put together a handful of options, and I look forward to working with the business community on what those look like.
Great, we look forward to working with you on that as well. We heard a panel of legislators earlier, several who were key in putting the transportation package together, key leadership roles putting the transportation package together. And they talked about the complexity of that process, the importance to have everyone included, how long it took, and they also referenced your vision around transportation and how that was instrumental in having them push forward. When we look at the long-term, structural deficit here at the state, will you bring the groups together in the same way you did around transportation, and what should we expect there? What will that look like going forward?
Absolutely. In terms of what would it look like, I think it's really important. The transportation system, the process we came up with really was enlightened by community need. And I think that's absolutely critical that we talk about what our communities need and want. But I also think it's really important that there be some proposals that folks can dig into and get their teeth into. And that's why I've directed my team to come up with a handful of options. For me, I want to see something that solves the issues for the long term, not just this biennium, that ensures that Oregon's economy continues to grow, that we can meet our needs in education, creating a seamless system of education, literally from cradle to career, as well as ensure that Oregonians can continue to access the health care that they need. So those will be my priorities as we move forward, and I look forward to getting your input and your feedback, and we'll certainly continue to talk with the business community around the state of Oregon as we work through that.
Thank you. One of the things that's come up this morning quite a few times in panels is this idea that the complexity of this work suggests that we need to get way ahead of it before the 19 session and start early in 18 in a process that includes public employers, business, the public employee unions, other advocacy groups, and so forth. How do we create that sense of urgency and that path forward in, I don't know if it's early 18 or whenever it is, to give us enough runway to get to that 19th session?
Well, I think we first of all have to understand the landscape, and with what's happening at the federal level, it's fairly unclear what the federal tax plan, the impacts on Oregonians, on Oregon businesses, and of course on our state budget. So once we know that, and if the Republicans are able to move as quickly as they can, we should know that by the end of the year. It will take my team, both the Department of Revenue and economists, a few days to analyze it. I've certainly been asking questions on my own, but we have to know that before we can really begin the discussion. The second piece, as I mentioned, my team's already working on a handful of options that we can consider, and they're talking with folks in the business community right now, and certainly continuing to talk with our folks in the labor community as well. So we'll be bringing folks together. I would like to see that happen sooner rather than later. I, of all people, know that once you get over the holidays, that time goes very, very quickly. And it's critically important to me, and I worked with the healthcare community to do this prior to the 16 session, is to bring folks to the table, come up with an option that there's a consensus around, that's pragmatic, or a menu of options that I can use in my budget that are practical and solve the problem. So I'm certainly want to get things going like last week. So.
Great. So a lot of our discussion for the rest of today is about technology and how that will transform the nature of the work we do, and also the education required to prepare people to do that work. I know education is a passion of yours. It is of mine as well. And I'm just wondering, how do you see a compelling need to substantially change? We talk a lot about education funding, but let's talk about the nature of education and how we're delivering education.
We absolutely need to change our education system, and we need to create, I said, a seamless system, but also we need to be creating lifelong learners. And I think the business community plays an absolutely critical role in that, and I'm seeing as I travel throughout Oregon and watching what's happening in the classrooms. Last week, I was at Park Rose Middle School. I had the incredible opportunity to watch sixth graders learn how to program. Folks from Google were there in the classroom with computers. The students were paired up, and they were getting computer programming lessons right then and there. And what that does is teach them skills that they can use way beyond school, and I think earn a really good living. and it wouldn't have happened without Google's partnership, at least that particular project. I was down in Salem a couple months ago touring the Career and Technical Ed Center there. It is extraordinary. If you haven't been, you need to go. That would not have been built without a strong partnership from the business community in the Salem region. Students are learning how to program drones, how to fly drones. I got to fly one. They're also coming up with very creative, innovative ideas that I think can be taken to market in that particular classroom. They also had a film and video class. Students were drawing. They were able to translate their drawings onto the computer. They were learning all of the audio. Again, that type of hands-on learning in Salem would not have happened without that strong partnership from the business community. The graduation rate from the Salem program, 98%.
That's fantastic.
Yes. So volunteering, being in the classrooms, partnering in terms of investments, we can't afford the type of infrastructure that we need to provide students with the hands-on learning without the business community. It's also doing the training. I was over at Boardman and watched what's happening in the classroom with Blue Mountain Community College. Amazon was doing the training for the data tech program there. They've done it for 1 to 2 years now, and now Blue Mountain Community College is able to do the training. Data tech jobs, these are really good jobs for the community, good paying jobs in Boardman, in Prineville, and in the Dalles. So the partnership, the volunteering, the training, and I would also just say volunteering to work with students after hours is also key, and then bringing students in for internships and externships. All of these, having access to these hands-on learning opportunities, I think will substantially improve our high school graduation rate because students will want to be in the classroom, they are engaged, and it connects the classroom to their career. So it's really valuable.
Well, Governor Brown, thank you. We don't want to take any more of your time this morning, so thank you so much for joining us here on stage today and for participating in, I guess, your 14th summit,
yes.
Or at least attending and participating in your 14th summit. And thank you so much for your undying commitment to and service to the state.
Thank you, Patrick. Look forward to working with you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks everyone for staying with us this morning. Please break for lunch, and when we will return, we'll reflect on what we heard, and we'll begin the afternoon discussion about the future of technology and work. Thank you.